How's it going, everyone? So, with our current situation, how everything's sort of going down, I want to have our online classes and sessions that we're going to have on Blackboard Collaborate to be more of a discussion-based type of a session, so we can just get to understand where all the issues and problems are, but obviously still going through work and trying to treat it as normal as possible. But because of this, I decided to make some pre-recorded videos of all the activities that we're going to be tackling. Now, with that, these recorded videos are going to live on YouTube, and I'll be sending out links to all these videos so that you can have a tutorial on how each activity is done in case you get stuck, you want to revisit it. Because I'm a bit concerned with how the latency is going to be with doing an online session. Just now, you might not hear my voice properly, or this the screen quality is quite blurry, but yeah, so that's the whole purpose of this. So obviously now moving into the YouTube space and making these type of tutorial videos, I needed to create a little intro. For me, I felt that this is quite important. You can't necessarily be a designer and put content out there that lives in this digital space and not take advantage of what you have in front of you. So right here in front of you now, so this is just a recorded session that I did of how I created the little animated intro that you saw in the beginning of this video. So everything's sped up. I made this in one day, and it took more or less about 3.5 hours, about 4 hours. So I needed to compress it quite a bit to fit the 19-20 minutes that it is now. The purpose of this is not to be a tutorial. This is rather just to show you the workflow and sort of give you some commentary on what I was thinking when I was making this. You know, maybe it sort of gives you a different perspective of someone else's workflow, what goes through their mind, what decisions were they making, and how things moved or changed from how they originally started. So just briefly, you see me now, I'm working in Photoshop because I only had an idea to use a specific type of font. I wanted some kind of a dry brush font, and I'm just playing around with different types of layouts and compositions, trying to see if I can find something that actually works, because other than the font and the color choices, I didn't really have much to go on. I was kind of just going with it and winging it and seeing what I could create, what I could come up with. So the majority of times, especially with the tasks and activities that you have now, for example, working with your trailer, you might have an idea to you that might seem like you have everything planned out, but you can never be too sure unless you actually start doing the work. Because once you start doing the work, you can see what works, what doesn't work. You can have a bit more creative freedom, and you can just let that take over and see exactly what the end result is going to be. So that's why I found that it's quite important just to show you this and just to tell you, I started off with just the font. I liked the font. The color choices for this, I knew I wanted something dark. I wanted something that was quite pale as a secondary or highlight color. So I went into an online color picker. I found something more or less that I did like. I adjusted it, brought it into Photoshop, made it swatches, and then from there moved straight into After Effects, where I started to recreate it. Now, the only thing I knew at this point is that I wanted to build the main type up, the online session type that's in this pale yellow. I wanted to build it up as if someone was actually writing it. Other than that, there was nothing really that I had planned. The rest sort of just happened, because as you start working with things, or me at least, as I started working with things, I could see what was working, what I still needed to add. And one of the things that I needed to add initially when I first saw this was the background was way too plain, way too static. And you can't have something that's very static if I'm trying to implement the idea of motion and trying to bring that across. So to have animated text that sort of appears as if someone's writing it and have a completely static background is quite boring. So that was the one thing that I needed to tackle, and I ended up dealing with that by using fractal noise and started to play with that. Also darkening it using the blend mode darken, and see what kind of effect that gave, some type of like alien goo slime type of a thing, which I really enjoyed the whole dynamic properties of that. So that was the one thing that I wanted to keep consistently moving, whereas the type itself and the type reveal using masks, that sort of happens in one motion and stops and stays on screen, whereas the background then can continuously move and act as that dynamic element. So this is very raw type of a video. So the idea is just to show you that, you know, don't necessarily have one idea and stick with it. So I started masking things off initially in a specific way. Found out that it didn't necessarily work, so I tried a different way of masking, and then I just ended up playing with the opacity of the word itself, because I wanted the whole word to reveal at once, not bits and pieces, which was my initial idea. So that's something to also just take into consideration. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because sometimes those mistakes will lead you into a different direction. So yeah, just the whole purpose of this, again, give you an idea about what's happening, playing around with After Effects, and also just to reinforce the idea that to create something that's quite nice and decent, it does take time and it takes a lot of effort. So especially now when you're in a position where the majority of work and the quality of your work is very dependent on you, I'm obviously here to try and help out as much as possible and explain things as best as I can and provide content and be someone who you can ask for help if you do get stuck with something. But the reality of this is that you need to take responsibility for your own work. You need to take responsibility and watch the tutorials to ask the questions, because it's very difficult for me to identify if there's any sort of problems. Please, if there's anything that's going to be bothering you throughout all the sessions, you can send me an email, you can ask me in one of the sessions, and then we can work through that and we can see if the same sort of problem that you've encountered resonates or links with the rest of the class, or if it's something that we need to work on a more one-to-one basis. So yeah, so again, what I'm doing now in the video is just masking using trim paths, or just using the pen tool. I'm going to apply trim paths to it. I'm just rounding it off so that it's a nice mask when everything reveals. And then lastly, the last thing that I sort of did in this is, once everything is done, I added a secondary animation element just to sort of help the text reveal. Just something else, nothing too hectic. It's also just using trim paths because it goes with the same flow, making it much more thinner, not revealing anything this time, not acting as a mask but as just a normal pencil. Same sort of color palette, a little bit darker, a little bit more brighter, to just emphasize what's sort of happening and to bring the attention to this word even more. And yeah, from there it's just about playing with different effects to see how I can go from this into the actual video. And one of the sort of effects that I stumbled across was the lens effect. So that's how I get the whole bulging type of transition, moving it from the animation intro into the actual content of the video. So again, this is just me having an idea of, I need to make an intro, I want to do it with a dry brush type of a font. What else can I add and what else can I do to sort of enhance that vision? Another reason for the way that I did things over here is I'm putting a lot of emphasis and attention to detail into the actual online session wording, because I know that that's going to be consistent throughout my different modules. So I can just adjust the colors of the different types of strokes and of the actual text itself, whereas the background, where it has the module code, the DDTE6211, that's quite static, and it just has a slight scaling property as well as the opacity change. So that word I can change quite easily in comparison to changing the word online session, where I have to redo the mask. So it's just I think a more smarter way of working, knowing what the end goal is. So my end goal, again, to make animated intro and have it for my different modules. So how can I make something that is quite unique, that still looks quite nice, it works quite well, but I can edit it quite well. So yeah, that's the whole purpose of this. If you do want to follow this like step by step, if you want to practice something, I would suggest downloading it. And if you bring it into Premiere Pro, you go to speed and duration, you bring that down to about 20%. You should be able to follow it, but because this is 30 frames a second, it's going to be quite jumpy, so just bear that in mind as well. But it could be nice, especially if you want to just look at a specific sort of effect thing that I ended up doing that you enjoyed, or you wanted to try it yourself. So again, this is just to sort of show you my workflow, give you an idea of how long it took me to do this, why I did it, and what I started off with and what I ended off with. So yeah, other than that, hope you have a great day. Peace.